Welcome to the 2020 Glass Art Society Virtual Conference, and this is Taming Lightning, Getting the Word Out. My name is Percy Eccles II. I'm the creator and host of Taming Lightning, the podcast on neon and plasma light, and I made my home here in Pittsburgh as the plasma light technician at the Pittsburgh Glass Center. We are certainly in some very unique times. We are re-examining our technology and communication platforms and finding a more meaningful way to engage them. Where, if you think back to it, nearly a decade or so ago, YouTube was not really seen as a platform for learning and sharing. And now we are finding that Instagram and TikTok are following a similar trend, and we are finding conference software and applications a way to communicate with people. And just to get to the point here, originally I was going to do a demonstration should the conference have gone on in Sweden. And that demonstration would have been a hotshot demonstration on how plasma can be done in a hot shop. So going back to my original proposal, which is to share with you guys my journey towards Taming Lightning, which is the understanding, learning, and teaching about plasma light and plasma sculpture, to the influence of social media and podcasting on that knowledge acquisition, and some very key players who helped me achieve what I have today. And then closing with my thoughts on the future of plasma sculpture through education and accessibility. So without further ado, we'll move on to the next slide, and we'll continue from here. I'd like to take a moment to honor the memory of Gavin Tiernan, who had passed earlier this year. He will be missed by his family, friends, the Plasma Art Alliance, neon, art, and glass community. And while I haven't known Gavin very long, it was because of the available media platforms that I had the pleasure of knowing and being inspired by him. And while we are unable to interview prior to his passing, I appreciate the one recorded conversation we had in which he tied me into new possibilities and new solutions for creating and wiring plasma sculpture. So before we begin, I'd like to share with you an amended version of a statement by Gavin that I think will help many of us who are new and continuing in plasma in order to remind us of the scope and the diversity of knowledge, the unpredictable natures, and certainly the mindset needed to pursue this dynamic and somewhat complex medium. I'm afraid there is no A plus B equals C approach to plasma, as so many tiny differences will yield different effects. You'll probably find that each of us have experimented and come up with varying techniques and subsequent results. But one person's finding will differ to another. Such is the nature of plasma. For instance, the choice of vessel shape, filling pressure, filling technique, filling recipe, electrode or no electrode, use of halogens, choice of driver, etc., all determine the final outcome, and often the results are as much of a surprise to the vessel maker as they are to the observer. This collective group here is akin to a web. All of us are part of the same basic goal, but each of us have discovered a different thread. All I can say is that the willingness to throw rare gases back into the atmosphere will yield results. The amended elements were inspired by William Worm's writing, Reticulate Aesthetics from Tree to a Web, in which I wanted to displace any type of hierarchy or tendency to look for one technique over another or one application over another, by changing the model of a tree to that of a web or nebulous structure, which is spreading out, connecting in different ways in different structures under the same purpose. While our approaches may differ, what may not work for me may be in favor of someone else's circumstances, and thus this has inspired a lot in how I approach learning in plasma today. So it's safe to say that maybe I should begin where I began in glass. Like, I went to Illinois State University in 2010 after getting my associates in arts, and decided to pursue graphic design. It was only upon a whim that a friend invited me to take a glass-blowing class with her that I even knew glass existed. And I think many of us have kind of fallen into that. And the nature of the community is what really keeps us in any field that we certainly enjoy and are excited about. Looking back, there's a lot of different trends that connects me from glass to my use of plasma as it is today. Whether it's assignments that allow me to express the use of light in glass using LED and Arduino, to fully art and technology design using laser printed acrylics, LEDs, and Arduino as well. Where the previous piece made people want to open those boxes, this makes people want to look away, or maybe look towards, or maybe feel disoriented. And of course, using that same light to give some sort of extra attributes to the sculpture to illuminate it in a different way. We all know that light's very important to glass, and glass to light. So it wasn't until 2014 when I took a workshop called Interactive Light at Pittsburgh Glass School. This is where I met my longtime mentor and friend, Patrick Collin. Here we practiced furnace glass blowing and flame working in the process of plasma, a very experimental class. Where plasma sculpture can really be defined, I guess you could say it's largely the practice of creating these dynamic lighting displays using glass, in which they are also interactive by nature of proximity and touch. Being close to it or even touching it can make it draw towards you or do something different. It was that interactive nature that drew me to plasma, and ultimately I was bitten by the plasma bug, and this had driven me to take this back home and try to pursue this and ultimately make it part of my BFA thesis. The adventures, or at least striving towards plasma, meant that I called 5 different neon shops until one answered, one with Super Signs in Normal, Illinois. Initially not really believing the process was possible, completely dedicated and stuck on the idea that 2 electrodes is the only way. Never really having seen the plasma globe, I was able to introduce him to plasma, Brad from Super Signs. But it took a little help, and I ended up calling Patrick Collin when he was very hesitant to give it a shot, especially when I came into a studio. I learned other things. I learned that maybe I got the wrong materials for phosphorescent pigments. Sure, it lit up, but that stuff eventually burned out and turned brown. And so I learned that there's still much more to figure out and to pursue for this. In that pursuit for making this stuff for my BFA, I connected back with Ash Williamson. You can find his episode in the second episode in the podcast of Taming Lightning, where I took my pieces up to him a couple days before my exhibition, and we had a good time filling it up and jamming out and seeing things glow. In order to kind of give you guys a context for how I'm setting up this show, really, it seems like this really smooth transition, but it's kind of crazy to think about it. Just the summer before, learned about this process, and then the summer after, towards the winter, I'm trying to make this for my show. So I created this space, tiling up the floor, painting the walls black, all used by applying some grants that I applied for doing my academics. The only light that was inside of here was using black lights. Plasma doesn't glow as brightly as neon does, so you have to really tailor that environment. Any type of light leak from the hallway can make it just seem too dull. So I really was trying to control this lighting. If it's difficult to photograph glass, then it's difficult to also photograph light. Then you can imagine the difficulties of photographing plasma or neon. These first few pieces I felt were not really the best, but they showed my attempts to use plasma with various glass technique, and even in this piece here, using electroluminescent wire to get a little extra refraction, where in person you can really see that glass pop in a similar fashion as the plasma, but when you try to photograph it, it becomes a very difficult task. My favorite piece of the show was this one. I felt it had the most complete image, shape, and everything. I think that was the best I could do and the best of my learnings and academics in glass, in plasma at that moment. And so it's a really dear part of my beginnings into plasma and that exploration. Fast forward just a year later, summer 2016, I moved to Pittsburgh for the year-long studio technician apprenticeship at the Pittsburgh Glass Center. This is one of 3 places I actually applied for and was asked for an interview. I discarded the other 2 places and went to the Pittsburgh Glass Center. There's some main talking points for this one, so bear with me. The Pittsburgh Glass Center's technician apprenticeship, year-long position, 6 months to 12 months. The big thing that sold me was the housing. They have housing for their technicians, especially their apprentices, just around the corner in their neighborhood. You're not that far from the studio, and you don't have to worry about paying for that. That's part of your package. You get a decent stipend, plenty of studio time, but the real kicker, and this is something that you only discover by being there, is that it's a huge nexus for a lot of different artists coming through, whether in Pittsburgh, whether it's glass, and whether it's any other medium. It's really connected to the art space and art that's here in Pittsburgh and all over the world. It's just an amazing opportunity. So if you get a chance, take a workshop there. If you're really new and you're just out and you're trying to try something different in the studio, jump over. Even if you're experienced, jump into the Pittsburgh Glass Center apprenticeship program. It's worth your time. 6 months or 12 months is up to you. About a few months in, we happened to get 2 donations of neon equipment. Luck has it I was there, right? So this is just an amazing opportunity. Immediately, not knowing what to do and never really handling this equipment, guess who I called? Pat Collin. He directed me to document and inventory all the items that were in donation, read through all the included papers and manuals, and try to sort it out and learn about what's going on. He says the best thing to really understand this stuff is to get it on your hands, and that's true. Even though I studied what he gave me and what I could find at that time, I'd had no clue and no understanding of what this all meant until it was right in front of me. After kind of reading those materials, he encouraged me to write a proposal to assemble, research, and develop a system for neon, but mostly for plasma, at the Pittsburgh Glass Center. This is kind of a really big deal. I come in as an apprentice. The Glass Center receives this neon equipment. And the reason that they take it in is they do have an interest in neon in the future. And then say, okay, cool. You got a proposal? Let me take a look at it. All right, cool. You're approved. Let's go ahead and figure out what we can do to get you started. There's no other place that actually does that, and that's a really special thing. And I'm ridiculously thankful for this opportunity. September 16, I submit that proposal. And looking back at that email, I definitely knew a lot more than I thought I did, but I understand more now of what I did then as well. Proposing a mobile compact cart that can be used and have versatile uses: hot shop, flame shop, kiln shop. Talking about glass solder, which I think Pat told me about. Providing examples of artists to come in for future classes. And then providing an example of what a 2-day workshop would look like if someone came in for a guided hands-on experience, with the second day being a lecture and demo portion. By December 30th, 2016, I had the cart assembled and fitted with neon and argon gases. And you can take a look. I even took some of the signs that came with that donation and fashioned a pretty appropriate sign. Future, it's going to be Experience Plasma. And then I give you a view of what that looks like today. And as I mentioned, or I'm going to mention eventually, I did receive the Advancing Black Arts in Pittsburgh Grant and Residency 2019, in which allows me to do all the stuff that you'll be hearing about pretty soon. But it allows me to really take an overhaul and get this to the sample of which I hope to be a good example, at least for what a public mobile cart could look like. And there's plenty of examples on Instagram that I've found thus far. After I built the system, now it was time to learn how to make, test, fill, and seal my forms. In the new year of 2017, I came out with my first few hard-won successful fills for Plasma, and we began looking towards a community of artists to learn more about Plasma, which eventually led to the podcast. During that summer, there were two key collaborations that pushed me a little bit further on this. Robert Mickelson came on to teach a class, saw the manifold set up, and was asking around who owned the system. Well, everyone seems to point to me, and Becky, one of our staff members who works in the Kiln studio, who is also hospitality during the summer classes, grabbed me aside and said, hey, you should talk to Robert. He wants to do a collaboration. Robert had worked with Plasma beforehand, working with both Bruce Suba and perhaps maybe even Wayne Stratman to get his pieces filled. So he understood what it took and what the type of form he needed and to take care in making that thing as best as possible. It's very rare you get that in one shot. Usually there's a few small openings or leaks, but things went perfectly fine, even though he chose a very difficult pose to work with. And this was set upon a wireless base where there was no wire directed to the glass, and it's being illuminated through high frequency radio waves. The second collaboration just shortly after that was with Chris Ahalt. Excellent and definitely supremely skilled glassblower as well, especially in the flamework glass. And he had wanted to do some Plasma stuff with me, so it was an opportunity to kind of try to distill a little bit of knowledge of form. What we both discovered was that when you try to pull something to a point, you create this potential for a tiny bit of tunneling, which creates a leak. Boral doesn't flow like soft glass, so it can often end up creating a little microscopic string that is able to hold pressure for blowing, able to hold water if it had water in it, but won't hold air and will leak air back into the empty vacuum vessel, which could make a light not light up for 2 weeks to a month. So I've been listening to podcasts for who knows how long, but one podcast in particular prompted me to start my own. This podcast was Finding Mastery. It had a style I really liked, and it focused primarily on getting the input of a guest in relationship to the host's interests. And it served as a model for me to explore, share, and promote artists working in both plasma, neon, and related fields. So in May 2017, I launched my first podcast episode of Taming Lightning featuring Patrick Collin, where we introduce you guys to plasma and neon. The goal today is still the same. I learn about these artists whom I met, were recommended, found through Instagram, and sometimes, just sometimes, they're the ones that contact me. The next section was hard to narrow down, but I chose a few influential people that I come across in the last 4 years, and I think they're just distinct enough to show you just a brief range of approaches to plasma. First out, we have Wayne and Mundy. Both of them had taken plasma in various directions, and they have, between the both of them, a little bit over 70 years of combined experience. They were able to teach the first class at the Pittsburgh Glass Center in 2018 for plasma with a setup that the Pittsburgh Glass Center had owned themselves. I think we had a class there before, as much as I heard, taught by Jason Chakravarty years ago, but the Glass Center did not have their own vacuum setup. So as you can guess, Mundy is kind of a wild man of sorts. 30 years of plasma experience, true free hand-blown glass, self-taught, and pretty much I consider the grooviest of the groovy plasma guys, who is the Willy Wonka of the plasma world. On the left-hand side, you see a sculpture that is human scale that reaches up just above you. Everything is sculpted by heat and glass, no extra tooling. And the piece on the right has a wire of his own handmade electrodes that dance the wires of light off the piece. Truly unique and psychedelic work for sure. Then we have Wayne Stratman, who's yet to have a podcast recorded with me, but shortly after this, I will give him a ring and see what we can do. He's definitely someone you should look towards and talk to and give a call. This man has been doing just as much, doing his own type of research, his own types of designs, and really one of the few people who honestly make a living by doing this plasma. As you guys will learn from his virtual tour on the 23rd, starting on Saturday, he'll just probably show you guys a lot of the things he showed us when I visited for the Plasma Art Alliance meetup, from lumen glass, flat glass he designed, to the shooting star or showers hourglass, the plasma beer mug, and various other devices and objects that he's put in a lot of research. He's someone that always constantly learns something new. Same with Mundy and many of these other people I'm showing. They never want to believe they've fit the end of the road. They're always pushing to the next level and always asking if they really know what's going on. Next up, we have Harriet Schwartz. Harry is a pretty unique person. And in some ways, we're in the same pathway, though her years in glass blowing far surpass my capabilities. But we met through Facebook group for the Plasma Art Alliance and through Instagram. And following her work, she has been able to really document what she's been doing. And so what I want to highlight with her is that someone who's primarily focused on furnace-blown glass has developed quite the skills and the hands, the hot hands, and the cool mind to do what she's doing, which is welding an electrode on her piece at room temperature, taking the time to heat up the end of the thick glass, to have a steady hand to attach with nerves of steel, and then the patience to cool it down using the torch so that it can be annealed properly later on. And showing and sharing how she's creating ways to affix hardware to the glass, which I've been using recently in solving some technical and sculptural issues with the way I design my glass. Sometimes you can't really design the structure ahead of time. You have to make those modifications. Well, then, as artists, we are very adaptive creatures and find new ways and creative ways to do things. So I met Ed Kirschen the first time, as well as Harry in person the first time in Murano for the GAS conference in 2018. I've heard a lot from Ed through Wayne and Mundy and Pat. And so Ed here taught a class with us recently in 2019 at the Pittsburgh Glass Center, Blow and Glow class, which was purely the hot shop class with Jaime Guerrero. He also took this class to the Glass Factory in Boda, and I would say he invited me, but I definitely asked him if I could come along, and he definitely put in the word for me to join him on that trip. All things kind of lining up as a sort of, because I normally would not have been able to go out that way to teach if it wasn't for the Advancing Black Arts in Pittsburgh grant that I received just in time for this workshop. So Ed's a bit different compared to the other group. He did not get into glass, at least artistically, until his 50s, and thus he chooses a different route. He chooses to, in the case of this piece, have someone fabricate it for him, designing and then trading his knowledge for plasma in order to have these pieces made or paying for them, right? And then he also developed the process of glass solder, which he was hoping to teach this summer at the Pittsburgh Glass Center, but due to the pandemic, we had made the decision to respect the health of our teachers and our students and cancel the class, which I think it's safe to say at this point for this one. So with this, he takes 2 ready-made pieces of glass, and he uses a glass solder to affix the ends and affix the electrode vertically in the kiln, and then they become a vacuum-tight envelope. With the reception of the Advancing Black Arts in Pittsburgh grant, funded by the Pittsburgh Foundation and the Heinz Endowments, I traveled with Ed to Sweden in order to teach the class at the glass factory Boda. Tommy is a great associate of the glass factory, the only neon bender in all of Sweden, and a really awesome guy to talk to. I think we've been in contact for maybe 1 or 2 years before we finally met, and he offered to meet up with me when I arrived, show me around the studio, and travel with me down to Boda with any items we may need for the workshop. And you guys can check out the podcast where I have an interview, where I'm being interviewed by our marketing intern, Simone Traub, at the Pittsburgh Glass Center, where I talk about the reception of the Advancing Black Arts Pittsburgh grant, the trip out to Sweden for the workshop, the Plasma Art Alliance meetup in Boston with Wayne Strapman, Mundy Hepburn, Ed Kirshner, Pat Collin, Aaron Ristow, and Harriet Schwartz, and many more. And definitely check this video out real quick before I move on to the next slide. A lot's been happening in the last year. And so far, this has helped me kind of take a moment to sit with those ideas and see that progress has been made. And then recognize those that help me move along that way. I mean, we have Ben Orozco, don't want to forget him. He's out there for his Fulbright, and he's going to show you guys his work he's made during that time there, studying with Tommy Gustav Scholl, building and assembling the neon setup there, and being our vanguard for that workshop. In that time, in the last year, there's some work that I really want to show you guys. So these are 2 pieces I want to show you guys. Is one, the Nimbus piece, a collaboration with Darius Sandberg, local artist who's often using found objects, drawing, cast glass, and small metalworks or bent wire. She's been having these drawings of clouds and ladders, and we've been working with that since 2017 until I decided, well, why don't we make that stuff with plasma? And we gave it a shot. You can see in the video to the right that the electrode fires off that arc of light, and then the ladder acts as a secondary electrode where light starts to bounce off the little sharp points on it. A really interesting discovery. It's something I couldn't even predict was going to happen, and something that Ed's been taking notes on as well. Don't know how long it will last. I mean, this thing's been lasting for quite a while, and we had it run for several different shows. So it's an experiment. It's an application, and we'll see what happens next in the next few pieces we make together. I also want to show you another piece I made. I've been blowing glass into these welded chains and getting these voluminous, fleshy like forms, but here I'm basically showing you guys the difference between an internal and an external electrode. What I mean by internal is an electrode that's just attached to the glass piece. You see the arc going in and traveling out, same piece, but now my wire that powers it goes to the chain, and the chain is this area where the light is powered through the glass, and that gives you a distinctly different visual effect. Now, as I try to close in on my thoughts here regarding the future of plasma, it's good for me to kind of talk about how I'm trying to break these things down. As a glassblower, I'm not a physicist or a chemist. I'm someone who has an affinity for the sciences and a desire to learn and understand, and willing to reach out to a community of various people of various distinct expertise. So I try to break it down because I want to understand it too. So I break it into 3 categories: vessel crafting, alchemy, and technology. Vessel crafting is the means of creating the vessel, understanding the form and structure that makes up that, understanding how to attach an electrode, distinction for electrode placement too, and then leak checking that so it can be ready to be filled. Alchemy is the process of cleaning, baking out, and processing and filling your piece so it can be lit. And technology is understanding the equipment that goes behind the whole nature of vacuum, the power supply, and maintenance. And there's areas where this overlaps. I think this understandable thing is alchemy is filling, technology is the equipment. The filling technique requires an understanding between both the gases and the technology you have on hand. And things like phosphor is like, if you really want to code something very well, then you have to consider what the form looks like and what you're going to fill it with. So this is an older design, but I hope to update it pretty soon with other things I've discovered most recently. Now, one of the things that a lot of people have a hard time with, and I struggle with this as well, was the accessibility of plasma. For most part, if you think about it in this 3-tier, the way I've kind of given it here, the most accessible means in plasma is glass making. That is vessel crafting, the means of access to glass making facilities, educations for glass, materials for glass, and techniques for glass making. That's everything someone can do, and I think that's a very important part of it. Because that's available, you shouldn't stop there and not work on those techniques. Once you come out of those workshops and you know you can't just go immediately to a neon place, develop the forms and batch it up. Make multiples so that you can get to the second point, which is maybe not as available as blowing glass, but there are people that can fill your pieces for you and work with you. Whether that's Bruce Suba, Wayne Stradman, Mundy Hepburn, the list goes on. There's quite a few more people I can list too. In alchemy, the means of which pieces can be filled and processed. I would say you shouldn't run straight into a neon studio and expect to be able to have your pieces processed for plasma. You need to have the respect for those places. Many times they don't have all the gases you'll want, and many times they will not invest in something that they can't guarantee, especially compared to the loss of material for the use of that. And then 3, facilities and technology, which are the means to learn, educate, practice processing and filling, and finishing plasma sculpture. Of course, you can go to places like now the Pittsburgh Glass Center, Pilchuck, Penland, and any of these other places that have neon, or like Urban Glass and Brooklyn Glass. But it's not something that you can expect to learn in the time and the hands-on nature that you would need to understand it. Many times the workshops give you an idea or get you a way to explore it, but you're not going to be able to put your hands on the equipment until someone designs a training system to work with. That way it doesn't slow down someone's access to filling just because someone tightens something too tight. So those things are kind of the consideration, but ultimately I leave it to you guys to make sure that you're still developing your skills in your glass making to accommodate the adjustments for plasma. And those aren't big adjustments. And I'm going to give you guys that. So as a bonus, I'll talk about some things that's going to give you at least something to think on and work on. One of the things you have to consider is the danger of implosion, and this video will illustrate that for you. video was sourced from Beyond the Press, the only video on YouTube and online that they can find that really illustrates the violence and danger of an implosion. What's an implosion? When you have an object under vacuum, the inside has less volume. And thus, when that object breaks, it's going to displace all that air that was not there. So it's going to rush into that space and collapse on itself. At a certain point, the volume that has imploded will become an explosion as particles pass the line in which the object was first at. So this danger is not going to kill you. It is dangerous and must be taken seriously, and that's why I'm providing a little set of guides and tips for you on the right-hand side. Such as number 1, putting on safety glasses. I don't care who you are or where you work, protect your eyes. If you check out on Instagram, there's a nice little story that Bruce Suba told about how someone almost lost their eyes and lost their sight because they did not wear safety glasses and were saved by the thinness of a contact lens. Number 2, check for imperfections, scratches, or foreign inclusions. Do not underestimate the scratch. When you're cutting rod, or you're cutting tubing, or you're scoring a piece of flat glass, that scratch creates a structural weakness for you to break it. Round is good, and there's no coincidence to the arch being a very strong form, to the light bulb being round, to the tube being an extrusion of a circle or the strength of a sphere. And if you're going to use round, there's the concave and convex surfaces rule of the 1 depth to 10 length, and that is suggested by Ed Kirshner. You want to have adequate thickness. It shouldn't be so thin that you can flex it with your fingers, and there's a point where thickness is just a matter of aesthetics, because when you're working with plasma, you're working for the interior volume in conjunction with the exterior form. Avoid large flat surfaces. Remember when you're stepping on that weak cardboard box, they support it on the sides, but the center bowls in. If you want to do that, the exception, and this is always set with a warning, is a 1 thickness to 20 length. And if there's any doubt, don't pump. Any doubt. When I first was introduced to this process, I would stay up late with Patch or Collin Tyne in the workshop to pump pieces left over by instructors. We had this large piece made by Rob Sturm, and it was this hemispherical piece with a flat bottom. We looked at it, and he goes, "Should we fill it?" And I was like, no, because that's a huge piece, and it's pretty late, and we agreed not to fill it. When any doubt, don't pump. And if you're going to take that risk, create a physical barrier. Get a heavy towel or create a physical barrier between you, like a thick piece of wood, and make sure no one's in the area. And of course, fill to a higher pressure, at least a quarter atmosphere for all forms greater or equal to the volume of a basketball. And Monday will talk more in detail about that if you listen to his podcast. He's got plenty of stories to kind of give you some crucial evidence of why you want to take those safety precautions. And I also want to give you guys some things to think about how to attach your electrode, and Harry's a great example of this. The first method and the most successful method is tubulating and welding. You create a vessel with a single thin wall tube and a needle. Then using a single head torch such as a Ranger or a neon welding or splicing torch, heat the end of the tube and the electrode slowly. And then you're going to weld on your electrode. As you attach it, you're going to use a blow hose attached to maintain the wall thickness of your connection. And then using a soft bushy flame, slowly cool the glass connection until the soot sticks, and then re-anneal to relieve stress. This gives you a perfect opportunity to position yourself and take the time to work on your weld. Where if you were doing it in a hot shop, such as the next slide here, which is the Pat Collin Tyne, I call it the stick and blow. You have to do it in the moment, and there's no time to think, and you have to have hot hands. You got to have a cool mind. So the stick and blow is very similar, except you're doing it while the vessel is still hot, and you're creating a vessel with a single hole that's slightly smaller than the diameter of your electrode. Either it's still attached to the pipe or knocked off on the table. You heat the opening of the vessel and then weld on your electrode, and with the blowhose attached, you maintain an even wall transition on that connection. And then while wearing proper heat protection, swiftly and safely carry and place your piece in the annealer. There's a problem with this, and it solves only one thing. If you don't like to have this kind of tube that comes off longer than your electrode because you're attaching to that, then maybe you'll stick it directly to that surface. But you only get one shot, especially in soft glass. If you miss, there's a hole, an opening or gap, you can't fix it. You're going to go through a lot of trouble to heat it back up and do it again. So that's often the reason why you would avoid it. Number 2, you can break the electrode off when putting it away in the kiln. And number 3, you can break the electrode out on accident by removing it from the kiln. That's why it's method number 2, but also an option. And if you're clever enough, you'll find new ways to make this from those 2 options to create a really nice vessel with these two methods. And the closing statement for you guys here is the world of plasma is vast. There's a lot to explore, there's a lot to look at, and a lot to learn. We are not limited by our resources, and technically as artists, makers, creators, researchers, whatever position, the human condition is that even though we have limited resources, our greatest strength are our resourcefulness and our capacity for change. And thusly, try different things. Try things you've seen, try things you've never seen before, document what you've experienced, and share. And as a thank you, I'm listing all the patrons I have listed so far who's had some kind of direct impact on Taming Lightning and myself. And I know this is not everyone. There's plenty more people I can put up here. So I definitely want to say thank you for tuning in for this presentation. And as always, be healthy, be safe, and be strong, and I'll see you next time.